You're watching The View, and today, legends clash. The familiar tune of The View's opening faded into the background as the camera swept over the excited live audience. The panel of co-hosts smiled wide, but Joy Behar's grin held a sharper edge than usual. She adjusted her red-framed glasses, glanced at her notes, and gave the crowd a wink. Today's guest, she announced with theatrical flair, is a Hollywood icon. He's been a smuggler, a fugitive, and even a president. But this morning, he's sitting down with us. Please welcome the one and only Harrison Ford. Thunderous applause filled the studio as Harrison Ford walked in with his signature slow stride. Wearing a charcoal blazer over a light blue shirt, he nodded casually at the co-hosts and gave the audience a humble wave. There was a heaviness to his presence, a man not easily amused by fluff. He took his seat, leaned back, and gave a brief smile. Thanks for having me. Whoopi started things off gently. Harrison, you've been in this game for decades. How do you stay grounded with all the noise of Hollywood? Harrison shrugged. I spend time in nature. I fix broken things. I don't take myself too seriously. Laughter, a bit of applause. Then Joy cut in. But come on, Harrison, you do take yourself seriously. I mean, you fly helicopters, give climate speeches, and act like Indiana Jones is a lifestyle. The audience chuckled awkwardly. Ford raised an eyebrow. I act in films, Joy. That's kind of the job. Joy grinned wider. Sure, but the whole grumpy grandpa shtick, is that real or just PR? A pause. Ford leaned forward. Is this what you do? Throw barbs and hope for sparks? The crowd murmured. Sarah Haynes shifted in her seat. Joy chuckled. Just calling it like I see it. Don't get cranky on us now. Ford's eyes narrowed. If I sound cranky, maybe it's because I thought we'd talk about something worthwhile. Not my facial expressions. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. The crowd was still. Even Whoopi looked up. Joy's smirk faltered. You're known for being intense. It's part of your image. Ford replied coolly, that's your narrative, not mine. A long silence. Then Ford added, but go ahead, Joy, take your shot. You've been itching since I walked in. Joy straightened in her chair. Well, since you asked, how does someone so concerned with climate change justify flying around in private planes? There it was. A few audience members gasped. Others leaned forward. Ford's jaw tightened. He glanced at Whoopi, then back at Joy. I fly for work. I speak about conservation because I care, and I offset my emissions, which is more than I can say for most people asking loaded questions on daytime television. Joy blinked, then let out a small, almost amused breath. So sensitive. Ford smiled, but it was the cold kind. You call it sensitive. I call it standing up for what matters. The audience applauded. Joy crossed her arms. You're a tough interview. Ford leaned in, and you're a master of provocation. Let's see where it gets you. The tension was tangible. The air buzzed. The interview was no longer a chat. It was a chess match. The silence after Harrison's last remark echoed louder than the applause. The atmosphere in the studio turned electric. That sharp, invisible current that jolts an audience into sensing something unforgettable is unfolding. Joy Behar shifted in her seat, a half smile still playing on her lips, but her eyes had narrowed. She wasn't used to guests pushing back, certainly not with this level of steel. Well, Harrison, she said slowly, we bring people here to talk, not scold. You're not at the UN. Ford leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm not here to be lectured either, Joy. I've been around too long to play nice with cheap shots. A few people in the crowd whooped. One voice shouted, Go Harrison! Whoopi Goldberg jumped in, attempting to cool the temperature. All right now, let's remember we're all friends here. But Joy cut her off. No, let's not pretend. Harrison seems to think he's above being questioned. Ford didn't flinch. I think there's a difference between a question and an ambush. Sarah Haynes' eyes widened. The audience gasped again. This was no longer a playful sparring match. This was war. Joy smirked. If you can't handle the heat, maybe the seat's too hot for you. Ford tilted his head. That's funny. I thought this seat was for adults, not circus acts. Gasps, a few cheers. Camera zoomed in on Joy's face as her smile evaporated. Circus act? She repeated. You think this show's a circus? Ford raised an eyebrow. When it stops being about ideas and starts being about gotchas, yeah, it starts to feel like one. Joy's tone sharpened. Maybe people just wanted to know if their heroes live up to their ideals. Ford fired back. Then ask honestly. Don't wrap it in snark and pretend it's journalism. The tension was razor thin. The audience was utterly silent, eyes darting between the two like they were courtside at a championship match. Joy exhaled, now visibly irritated. I suppose next you'll accuse me of being part of some media agenda. Ford didn't blink. I don't need to accuse you. You're doing a good wash showing it yourself. A groan rippled through the room. Whoopi held up a hand. Okay, we're getting spicy now. Joy turned toward the camera, attempting to regain composure. This is The View, folks, and today's view is stormy. The crowd chuckled nervously, but the damage was done. The divide between host and guest had widened into a chasm. Ford sat back, folded his arms. You wanted the real me. Don't be shocked when I don't play along. Joy's eyes flashed. Just remember, Harrison, you came here. We didn't drag you in. He nodded slowly. You're right, and I can leave just as easily. The crowd collectively inhaled. The battle lines were drawn, and the war wasn't close to over. The studio lights seemed dimmer now. Not because anyone had touched the controls, but because the tension had eclipsed the usual sparkle of daytime television. Cameras captured every twitch of Harrison Ford's jaw, every flicker of Joy Behar's tight smile. There was no mistaking it. The conversation had left the rails. Joy tried to regain control. Let's pivot, shall we? You have a new movie out? Maybe we talk about that? Ford didn't smile. You want to change the subject now that things aren't going your way? Laughter from the crowd, sharp and divisive. Joy's nostrils flared, but she held her posture. Excuse me for thinking this was still an interview, not a deposition, she shot back. Ford's tone was razor sharp. Then maybe ask something that doesn't sound like cross-examination from a reality show judge. The air popped, like a balloon stretched too far. Whoopi glanced off camera toward the producers. Sarah leaned back, eyes wide. Joy smirked, tapping her pen on the desk. So touchy, maybe the grumpy label isn't such a myth after all. Ford's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, more like a growl. When I want psychoanalysis, I'll pay for it. Until then, let's stick to something real. A nervous ripple of laughter moved through the studio. Joy leaned in, voice dropping just slightly. All right, here's something real. You lecture about climate change, but you live in a massive ranch and fly vintage planes for fun. How is that not hypocrisy? Gasps. The audience was now glued to every syllable. Ford's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests. I don't owe you or anyone else an apology for the life I live. I fly to remote areas where people can't be reached. I use my platform to push for action. What do you do besides throw mud from behind a desk? Joy leaned back, stunned for a split second, then recovered. What I do is challenge people in power. You don't get a free pass just because you played Han Solo. Ford stood suddenly. The crowd jolted. The studio fell into stunned silence. You know what? He said, voice calm but loaded with fire. I came here expecting a discussion. What I got was tabloid trash dressed as daytime TV. Joy's eyes narrowed. So you're walking out because you can't take the heat? Ford stared at her. I'm walking out because this isn't worth my breath. And with that, he stepped away from the desk. Gasps erupted. Some audience members applauded. Others sat frozen. Joy tried to laugh. Well, there you have it, folks. Harrison Ford, everyone, a real class act. But Ford turned back one last time, looked directly at her, and said, You want to play tough, Joy? Try doing it with something that matters. Then he exited the set. The silence left behind in Harrison Ford's wake wasn't just awkward. It was seismic. The audience didn't know whether to clap or gasp. Some murmured to each other in disbelief. Joy Behar shuffled her cards with hands that weren't quite steady. Well, that escalated, she muttered, trying to reset the energy, but the damage was done. The camera panned to Whoopi, who was uncharacteristically quiet, her eyes following Ford's exit as if unsure whether to chase after him or let the moment burn. Backstage, Ford's footsteps echoed down the hallway. A stagehand offered to escort him to the green room, but he waved them off. Let them clean up their own mess, he growled, slipping his blazer back on. Meanwhile, back at the desk, Joy turned to Sarah Haynes. Honestly, I don't know what just happened. I ask questions. That's my job. Sarah hesitated, then offered diplomatically. Maybe it wasn't the questions. Maybe it was the tone. Joy scoffed. Please. He's been doing press tours for decades. You'd think a Hollywood legend could take a little pushback. The audience responded with a mix of uneasy laughter and slow applause. But then came the whispers. A clip of Ford's exit had already hit social media, multiple angles, subtitles. The phrase, "This isn't worth my breath," was trending within 10 minutes. Memes flooded in, Ford's stern face next to captions like, "Joy be like, let's fight climate change," by burning bridges. On X, the debate raged. Ford vs. Behar was top trending. Fans of Ford lauded him as a straight shooter who finally said what many thought. Critics claimed he overreacted. Daytime TV pundits speculated whether this would damage the show's credibility, or Ford's. Backstage, a producer caught up with Ford. "Harrison, we can smooth this over. Maybe return for a closing remark?" Ford stopped in his tracks. "I don't do damage control for people who throw gasoline and strike matches," he said, his voice even, but icy. Meanwhile, Joy doubled down on air. "Look, if you come on this show, expect to be challenged. If that's too much for a Hollywood action hero, maybe it's time to retire the fedora." That line, meant as a joke, immediately went viral, but not in the way Joy intended. Viewers split into camps. Some called her brave, a host doing her job without flinching. Others blasted her as smug, provoking a guest only to play victim when the blowback hit. At ABC headquarters, executives started a quiet damage assessment. Back in the studio, Whoopi finally spoke. "You know, sometimes interviews go left, but this one, we might have lost the room." Joy, flustered, adjusted her mic. "Let's move on." But the conversation had moved on without her. Clips of Ford's walkout were being replayed on cable news, reaction videos were flooding YouTube, and even late-night hosts were teasing the showdown in their monologues. Harrison Ford hadn't just walked off a talk show. He had ignited a media firestorm, and Joy Behar was still sitting in the smoke. The day after the infamous walkout wasn't just any ordinary broadcast day. It was the epicenter of a media earthquake. Every entertainment outlet, every morning show, every late-night monologue opened with some version of the same headline. Harrison Ford walks off The View, and the internet has thoughts. By noon, the clip had racked up 23 million views. But what came next, no one could predict. Joy Behar sat at The View's familiar roundtable the following morning, clearly rattled. Her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She tried to carry on as normal, shuffling her notes and grinning at the camera. "Yesterday," she began, "we had quite the spirited discussion with Mr. Ford. Not everyone can handle the heat." That line didn't land the way she hoped. The audience didn't laugh. In fact, someone in the front row whispered audibly, "You went too far." She faltered, for just a second. Cut to Harrison Ford. At that exact moment, he wasn't hiding out in Montana or sailing the Pacific. He was at ABC News headquarters, by invitation. Ford had requested to speak directly to executives, not to apologize, but to make something crystal clear. Inside a glass-walled meeting room, he sat across from the top brass, calm, controlled, but firm. "I've done thousands of interviews," he said. "I've sat with journalists, comedians, even critics who didn't like a damn thing I've ever done. But they respected the seat I sat in. Yesterday, that seat was a firing range." One exec cleared his throat. "Joy's known for provocation," Ford cut in, "and I'm known for not playing games." Silence. Then he added, "If this network wants guests like me, the kind that draw headlines and ratings, then there needs to be a line. Otherwise, I won't be the last one to walk off that set." Back on The View, Sarah Haynes and Whoopi Goldberg tried to steer the show back to safe waters. Light topics, viral pets, a cooking segment with a bubbly guest chef. But the shadow of the Ford Behar clash loomed large. Then something unexpected happened. Midway through the show, producers received a direct message from Ford's publicist. Mr. Ford will release a personal statement on air. 10 minutes later, the screen behind the host blinked, cutting to a pre-recorded video. The audience gasped. Harrison Ford, sitting alone in a chair against a dark backdrop. He looked straight into the lens. I've played a lot of roles, heroes, scoundrels, leaders, but I've always been myself. And what I saw yesterday wasn't tough journalism. It was performance. It was bait. He paused, letting the silence sting. I walked out because I didn't come to be mocked. I came to talk about something I care about, the climate, the future. And if you don't care, that's fine. But don't pretend you're listening when you're just waiting to pounce. Well, the screen faded to black. The studio audience? Stunned. Even Joy had no immediate words, until Whoopi finally spoke. I think that was probably the most honest moment we've had in a long time. Joy, visibly tight-lipped, didn't respond. Not this time. Social media exploded again. But this time, the tide had turned. Even longtime View fans were calling for accountability. The network's official clip of Ford's statement gained 10 million views in under 3 hours. Then came the final blow. ABC released a press statement later that afternoon announcing, "We are grateful to Mr. Ford for his candid expression. While The View has always encouraged open conversation, we recognize when the balance of respect is lost." Joy wasn't named directly, but everyone knew what it meant. By week's end, Harrison Ford's bold stand had reignited public discourse on interview ethics, guest dignity, and the role of talk shows in shaping the narrative. And Joy Behar? She returned the next Monday. But not with her usual swagger, not with the sharp tongue and gleaming grin, because something had shifted. The day Harrison Ford stood up and walked out was the day The View had to look in the mirror. And for once, it blinked.